Again, I recognize a lot of you from Triad. Anyone that's not familiar with it, Triad is the Sheriff's Office, District Attorney's Office, Police Department, Fire, Senior Center, seniors, community leaders. We all come together to share best practices to keep seniors safe and independent. We try to give the tools and education to help you stay safe and in your homes. So if anybody is ever interested, you're always welcome to come. We meet once a month here. So Triad has partnered with these guys, Mass Office on Disability, and Evan George, who is the coordinator, the emergency preparedness coordinator, and he's going to be talking about the contents of these the backpacks, the Go Packs, why they're important, and how they can keep you safe. So these will help keep you prepared for any emergency, and I think you'll enjoy this. So, and there's one per person. You have to be here. You can't take a bag for someone else, as for obvious reasons. There, we need to be able to get them to as many people as we can. So, anyways, here's Evan.
So my name is Evan George, and I'm here with the Massachusetts Office on Disability, along with the Department of Homeland Security, to talk about emergency preparedness. And this is actually my first training of 2020, so thank you for bringing me into the new year. And did people hear about the California wildfires that took place about a month ago? Yeah. And one of the big things with that fire was that they shut down power to almost about 1 million people to hope that the fire wouldn't then catch the power lines to continue to spread. What they didn't do was tell people ahead of time that they were going to cut off the power. So what ended up happening was senior citizens, people who lived in assisted living or independent living facilities, all of their power went down, and they had to self-sustain by themselves for 2 or 3 days without electricity, without the phone lines. And that is exactly the type of scenario that I'm here to help prepare you for. So this whole training comes out of Hurricane Katrina. Quick trivia question to start off the day. Who here remembers what year was Hurricane Katrina?
38.
You can just shout it out. Any guesses? Hurricane Katrina, city of New Orleans. Much later than 96, late in the 70s, 2005. So in 2005, Hurricane Katrina completely devastated the city of New Orleans and resulted in about 1,800 deaths. What they then did is something called an after-action report. And what they found was that half the people who died, so now roughly 900 people, fell into 2 different categories. One were senior citizens, and the other were people with disabilities, what we call people who require additional assistance. And at first, this confused everyone. People didn't understand why did senior citizens and people with disabilities die at such a high level. So what they did was they looked through New Orleans emergency plan, and what they found was that at no time did it actually take into account the unique needs that senior citizens or people who require additional assistance need. So for example, if we send out a communication blast that tells everyone to evacuate, well, if you're deaf or hard of hearing, how do you actually get that notification? Or if we tell you to evacuate to a shelter, and that shelter is 30 miles away, and you don't drive, you don't have a car, or you have mobility issues, how do we actually make sure you get from where you are to the shelter? Believe it or not, before 2005, none of these issues were really thought through. And this made every state look at their own internal plans to see if we're prepared. So what I get to do is I travel around to every city and town in Massachusetts and put on as many of these trainings as possible, not just so that you all in this room know what to expect in case of an emergency, but also so that you can tell everyone you know what the procedures will be and how to be individually prepared. So trivia question number 2. How many cities and towns are there in Massachusetts? Oh, a lot of people knew that one. All right, 351. I usually use my little trivia questions as a way to find my coffee, but you got that one too quick. So 351 cities and towns. This program has gone to about 180 of them. So we still have about half the state to go. And every city and town has two things in common. You have a local emergency manager, someone who's designated to be the point person in case of a disaster, and you have a local emergency plan. Besides our first responder in the room, who I want to ask you to introduce yourself in just a moment, for $500, who here has seen your local emergency plan? All right, so I get to keep my money. Great way to start the year. And the reason I get to make that bet with you is I already know you haven't seen the plan because we don't make it publicly available. And that at first is funny because I get to always make that little bet. But second, it's because that sounds a little confusing. Like right now, you would imagine I have your city plan and we're going to discuss it together. The reason we don't do that is really two things. One is after 9/11, people got very nervous about sharing any sort of security information, where will there be large amounts of vulnerable people. But the second reason, the reason I like to highlight the most, is we really don't know what the disaster is going to look like. So if right now I went through your plan, and as part of your plan, it'll have a primary shelter, which the city anticipates we're going to ask everyone to go to. And if I told you where that shelter was, then right now, 3 years from now, if there's some big event and you all are told to evacuate to the shelter, you're going to remember that training. You're going to say, oh yeah, that nice bald man told me to go to this shelter. However, if there is a tornado and that tornado is heading right to that shelter, well now guess what? That it will not be a shelter. And they're going to open up shelter B, or shelter C, or shelter 23. So we don't discuss it ahead of time because we want you to adapt in the moment to find out where do you need to go and how do you be safe. And with that, we can now turn to our packets. But before we quickly do, because I'm not the only, we'll call emergency expert in the room, would you mind just quickly introducing yourself?
Hi guys, my name's Captain Brian Sherella. Most of you know me. We actually had luncheon the other day, so most of your faces, as always. We see you guys a lot on calls. So if you guys ever have any questions, give me a call. Let me know through him. Just here to make sure everybody stays safe. And just one quick note, we have a member on our department now that is fluent in sign language. So if there is someone in here that is deaf, we do have the means now that he's certified. He's unbelievable. He's certified in sign language, so that's something good that we have.
Awesome. So during this training, it might be a little awkward because I might actually just have to hand you this mic. I was waiting for the TV people to yell at me, but they didn't. So, but if you have any questions that he might be a better fit to answer, we'll kind of just direct back and forth. So I saw some people trickle in as I was speaking. Does everyone have this packet? Okay. If not, I got another 500 up here. So this training is a little bit of a lecture, which I love. I can talk for a while over a lot of different topics. But my way of saying that is if you'd rather just sit back and relax and not flip through this, you can do that. Everything I'm going to verbalize can also be found in these packets. So that also means vice versa. If you're already a little bit tired of listening to me, you can just look down and read this packet and it'll have all the information for you. So the first is this shiny blue, which makes it look like I made a mistake printing. I didn't, but I'll explain that in a little bit. If you just want to put that one down. And then in the middle, there are two white packets. And the one that I'm going to go through first says go. And again, if it's going to be too taxing to go back and forth, you don't need to flip through with me. It just kind of helps my memory as I go. So the first page is your table of contents. Pages 2 and 3 are about the Massachusetts Office on Disability. Quick show of hands, who here has ever heard of the Massachusetts Office on Disability? Okay, that's actually a pretty decent number. Very quickly, the Massachusetts Office on Disability, what we call MOD, was created in the early 1980s, and it's their job to ensure the full and equal participation of people with disabilities in everyday life. What it means to have a disability really just means that you need additional assistance with one of life's everyday tasks. So whether that is mobility, getting around, whether that is speaking, whether that is hearing. So having a disability has a very wide definition. And again, it's really just for people who require additional assistance, which means if you feel like you would fall in that category, meaning you need additional assistance for just one of everyday's tasks, then this agency exists to help you. And they do that in a myriad of different ways. They put on trainings like you're going through today. If you ever have any questions about your rights, like, or for example, why does this door not have one of the buttons to open so it's nice and easy? Or how come there's only one handicap parking spot in this location? This is the agency that you call with those type of requests, and they have client assistance, and they'll be there to either directly help you or tell you how to navigate the complex system that is our government. And we also do a lot of monitoring of both public and private entities to make sure that they're following the ADA, the Americans with Disability Act. So the next page is about 911, which I'm going to get to a little bit later. But the first thing that I'm going to talk about is, I believe, on page 5, and it's called the 911 Disability Indicator Form. So I briefly alluded that one of the big things that we learned from Hurricane Katrina was we really didn't know who in our local community needed help because we don't keep registries. So we've kind of accepted that at maybe very, very high levels of the government, NSA, FBI, they might have a lot of information about people, Amazon, Facebook, Google. If you go on the internet, they have a lot of information about us. But the truth is, your local first responders, like the people in this room, your fire department, police department, EMS, they don't have information about us unless we voluntarily disclose it. So what this form is a way for you to voluntarily disclose if you have a disability or might require additional assistance, not just for an emergency, but for any type of 911 situation. So for example, if you filled out this form, you bring it to your local police department, let's say you call 911, the operator picks up, hello, 911, what is your emergency? If you filled out this form, well, now your information will be displayed. So let's just say if you're somebody who's deaf or hard of hearing, that'll now display on the screen, so now the operator can tell your local police, oh, you're responding to somebody who's deaf, you can't just knock on the door, you now need to do X, Y, or Z. Because they would not know that information unless it's voluntarily disclosed. I speak at a lot of support groups for parents who have children with disabilities, and one mother told me that she filled out this form, brought it to a police station, and her 2 children, on top of some severe medical needs, are both autistic. And so now in her local community, the police and ambulance know that whenever they come to her house, they shut off their lights and their sirens because it's so overly stimulating for her children. They would not have known that unless she voluntarily disclosed it. And so this form is for all 351 cities and towns to use. Luckily, if you live in this city, you have additional resources on top of that. So you can go to your state website, which I believe we're going to provide in some capacity, and you can just input it directly from your computer. And now that'll be a way for you to have that information and also to get local alerts of what's going on in your community. But just to be sure, I would also recommend filling out this form, or if you know somebody who could benefit, bring it to your local police and they'll input you in the 911 system. Because 911 doesn't really work the same way we think it works. Most people think when you call 911, it goes to your local police. That's actually not how it works. What it does is it goes to a regional hub, and then from there they direct your call. So there used to be a joke that right now I could take out my cell phone and order us all pizza from Domino's, and Domino's knows exactly where I'm standing. But depending on where you are in the country, if you call 911 on a cell phone, they might have no idea where you are. And the reason for that is 911 was created before there were cell phones. Who here has a landline? Okay, you are good. Your landline is like a route that is directly connected to the network. Now, on top of that, luckily, because we live in Massachusetts, we have upgraded our system so that if you call 911 on a cell phone in Massachusetts, they can find you. They do a cool system called triangulation. They take 3 cell phone towers that form a little triangle, and they can figure out where you're standing in the middle of that triangle. But there are some states in the country that don't have that. So if you're ever traveling, it's a good idea to just try to remember a highway marker where you are in case your car breaks down or what have you, because they might need your help in finding you.
Does that mean that I have not gotten rid of my landline because I was worried I wouldn't, in case of emergency, you wouldn't know where I am. Is that now not necessary in the states of Massachusetts?
So again, in Massachusetts, with your cell phone, they'll be able to find you. I would say if you still have the economic means to keep a landline, that's preferable. So on top of that, we are also the first state, and this is on the previous page, page 4, to allow you to text to 911. Quick show of hands, who here texts? Okay, that's a good amount. And even if you didn't, I'm sure you know nieces, nephew, children, grandchildren, kids in your community who do text. The reason I like to talk about this is because if you can imagine being a teenager and you're, we'll say, at a party and you feel very unsafe, you want to call the police for help, but you don't want the people around you to know you're calling the police, you can now text. Or if, let's say it's late at night, you're in an Uber, a Lyft, a taxi, again, you feel very unsafe, you know that if you call 911, well, now the driver will know you're calling 911, you can now text. And I can promise you, similar to a lot of the things I'm going to share here today, you are probably some of the only people in your community that know that that exists. So again, if you do interact with teenagers, kids, people in their 20s, what have you, share that information because it is a very cool life-saving trick. Also,
Just text 911.
yep, just like you would text a phone number that you don't have saved in your contacts, it goes in the same route. Yes.
If you don't have your location on, is it okay still?
In terms of texting or in terms of finding you?
Finding you?
They should still be able to. So how your cell phones work is it goes through a satellite. However, if you have like your Wi-Fi on, that's kind of what sends out like little pings. It's easier to find. So they might tell you to make sure your Wi-Fi is on because that sends the strongest signal of your RFI, your radio frequency identification to find you. So,
If you ran out.
well, if you ran out of battery, actually, luckily later, there's going to be a little useful trinket I have for you to help you with that. Yes, and then yes.
So what if you are in the middle of nowhere?
So
No cell line.
So if there is no cell phone reception, now it gets tricky. Because, I mean, similar to really any situation, if you don't have access to if you have no cell phone reception, that's the same as just not having a cell phone. You just wouldn't have that means. So you would have to find another means of getting to that. Well, in this scenario, you wouldn't be able to call your husband because you wouldn't have cell phone reception. But there's, 10,000 hypotheticals that we can kind of like spiral around. The things to remember is that you can use a cell phone and 911 will be able to find you. If you're in an area without cell phone reception, you need to find another person who can help you, and hopefully they'll be able to connect you. Sir, do you have one more question?
Yes, I do. This information you mentioned to punch in for visually impaired, hearing impaired.
Yes.
Do you do this twice, once on your landline, once on your cell phone? Or do
Just once.
you tie them together?
It'll be interconnected. So if you if you bring this form, all the phone numbers that you use, they'll have you just list on it, and then it'll have you taken care of. So that was a lot just on 911. There's two big things that I'm going to talk about with communication. So if you need help, you call 911, you call your government. When your government wants to call you, they use what's called reverse 911. I like to make the noise. I'm very hesitant because I'm all mic'd up right now. But if people ever heard an Amber Alert, like that, so that is an example of kind of what that system looks like. If you have a landline, you'll have that communication blast. They're upgrading it for cell phones. This is another area where your local city and town is ahead of the curve. You have a local alert system that you can input your information and they'll send out their own blast. So please do that, and we'll make sure that the lovely people who work here share that direct web address, and help you do it if you need to, if they have computers on this location. Also, if you're watching television, they'll cut in. If you're listening to the radio, they'll cut in for a broadcast. That's our reverse 911 system. On top of that, there are two big things for you to know to get information in the moment. These are probably the two most important things I'm going to share with you today. So if you haven't paid attention yet, these are the two to pay attention to. The first is on the next page, page 7, and it's called Ping 4 Inc. It has the worst name imaginable. I don't know why it's called that. It's a little confusing. But what this is it's an application for your cell phone. So who here has a smartphone? Okay. A smartphone is any phone that can go on the internet. And now you would go, you download applications. I'm happy to show everyone here where that is on your phone. If you have an iPhone like I do, it's just called apps. You can't delete it, so I know it's on your phone. If you have a Samsung or anything by Google, it's called the Play Store. You go to that, you hit it, you type in ping for Inc., you hit download, accept, accept, accept. And what this does is it uses the GPS on your phone to know if you're safe. So for example, about 3 months ago, I was giving a training, I think in Falmouth. And during the training, I got a little alert. I quickly checked my phone, and it said, shelter in place, there's a tornado 6 miles away. Now, it knew that because I downloaded the app, and GPS, Global Positioning Satellite, it knows where I am, and it knew where I was in terms of the disaster radius of the event. And it used the phrase shelter in place. So let me just quickly clarify what that means. There is hypothetically 500 different scenarios you could face, like a man-made disaster, a chemical spill, a terrorist attack, hurricane. However, in all reality, your government will only tell you to do one of two things. They're either going to tell you to evacuate, get out of where you are, or head to a shelter, or the opposite, which is what we call shelter in place, which is a fancy way of saying, do not go outside, stay exactly where you are. And so this application, it told me to shelter in place, so I told everyone, hey, we get to practice this for real now, no one should go outside, let's just wait this out. And a good thing to remember is that one, let's say if I was here when that event happened, well, my phone wouldn't have bothered me because my phone knew I was safe. So this will only send you alerts if, again, you were within that disaster radius. The second important thing to remember is if I was in Florida and the same thing happened, there was a tornado 6 miles away, this application wouldn't tell me that because this only works for the state of Massachusetts. Most of our systems are what's called decentralized, meaning every state does its own thing. So in Massachusetts, we have this. If you were traveling to another state that had the means to afford it, they would have their own statewide system. But having this on your phone and tell everyone you know who has a smartphone to download it, again, it's only bothered me twice, and it's just told me when I was within that disaster area. Or hypothetically, if you were in southern New Hampshire or like northern Rhode Island, you would still probably get the alerts if it impacted you. So that was the second most important thing I'm going to share. That'll help keep you safe while you're here. Also, as we mentioned before, your city and town has the local emergency blast. Definitely download that. So that way, if you are traveling, let's say you're in Florida, but something happens up here, your local cities and towns system will send you a notification. So that way you can say, oh, like there's flooding going on, I'm going to call my neighbor so they can go check on my house. So make sure you have that downloaded as well. The most important thing I'm going to share, it's all the way on page 14, and it's called 211. Who here has ever heard of 211? Okay. So 911 is when you need help. In any emergency, you call 911. 211 is the phone number you call when you need information. So for example, I was living in Boston in 2013 when the Boston Marathon bombings happened. So that was on a Monday. And then that Thursday night, Boston issued a shelter in place, which means do not go outside, because they were chasing the 2 terrorists throughout the city. When I woke up the next morning, I had no idea if the shelter in place was still in effect. It turns out it was. They didn't catch the final person until like 7 p.m. that night. I could have called the police, but chances are they were very busy because the city was in lockdown. 211 is the phone number that I would have called to ask the question like, is it safe to go outside? Or in any scenario, you call 211 if you need to know, where is my local shelter? How do I evacuate? That is the direct phone number. It goes to MEMA, the Massachusetts Emergency Management Agency, and they are there to help answer all those questions. Because again, I can't tell you directly where your shelter will be because I don't really know what the event will look like. Or I can't tell you what your best evacuation route will be right now because, again, I don't know what the event will look like. So if you can remember to call 211, that is how you will get the information in the most direct way possible, on top of the reverse 911 and all the other systems. So if you remember nothing else from this training, you remember to call that phone number. and they will help you with any statewide emergency. And I'll quickly clarify that, and then I'll open it up for questions. So by statewide emergency, what I mean is all emergencies start at the local level. So if you have a house fire, somebody will call 911, one of the first responders in the room will go, probably have to leave, they'll send their fire trucks there. If that fire continues to spread, now all the cities and towns around this area get a phone call, they send their fire trucks. If that fire now continues to spread, now the state, MEMA, the Massachusetts Emergency Management Agency, they get a call and they start coordinating resources. If that fire continues to spread, I guess trivia question number 3 or 4, who's the next person to get a phone call? FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency. And so what I mean by that is, if you call 211 and then the operator says, oh, like I'm sorry, we are not made aware of this situation, it could just be that this is a very small situation, which is still at the local level. At which point I'll then say you can call your local police or fire department, and if they have the means, they'll have somebody staffed there to help you. You wouldn't call directly 911. Again, that's only for help. 211 or calling directly your local police or local fire department is for the information. So that was a lot just on communication. As I said before, it is the most important part, how you can get notified of in the moment. As I try to find my coffee, does anyone have any questions on anything I've shared thus far? So everything I'm sharing with you today is for Massachusetts. You can view me as kind of like an embodiment of the Massachusetts government communicating the state level services we have. 911 is really the only federal-wide system that I've shared. 211 and those specifics, like the application, that is all just statewide. So every state hopefully will have their own system. So if somebody specifically, local level, would like to address this, you can. I will say, because that will then require you to assess the situation, they would probably prefer if you call 911 to get help. That'll just be my answer, because then that'll have to require you to make that assessment for yourself, and you might not have the capacity to make that assessment. So when in doubt, you call 911. So that was just communication. We're now going to pivot to sheltering. Before I do that, there are 2 big things in this packet I just want to highlight, and they're all the way at the end on pages 15 and 16. And so if you ever need services, I would say you have probably one of the nicest Council of Agings I've ever been to. So if you need programs or services, my first step would be here. I would speak to one of the lovely women who work here. But if you're ever looking for day services, personal care services, health, therapeutic, mental health, in-home supports, any program like that, and you don't think you can afford it, or you just don't know where to get it, Mass Options, it's a statewide system, and they exist to help connect you with services in your area. They will help you navigate the web that is Medicare and Medicaid and all that stuff. So again, the most direct route, I would say, is to speak to the people here. But if you need programs or services and you just don't know how to access it, call this phone number or go on this website, spend the 20 minutes, play around, and you'll be amazed at how many programs exist at the state level, and they just don't know who needs help. Similarly, on the following page is a program called Re-Equipment. So if you're ever, well, I'll use the inverse. If you have old equipment, like an old shower chair, rocker, cane, wheelchair, what have you, and it's just like sitting in a basement, you don't use it anymore, you can call these people up, they'll swing by, they'll pick it up, they'll make it all nice and new, they'll give it to somebody in need. Vice versa, if you need that equipment, again, my first stop would be here because they'll know the local resources better, but you can call Re-Equipment or go on their website, and again, you'd be amazed at like just how much stuff is kind of just sitting around and they don't know who needs it. So Re-Equipment for equipment, Mass Options for programs and services. So now, along with that, we can now talk about shelters. One quick second. And what we learned from shelters also comes out of Hurricane Katrina. So when Katrina hit, they opened up 6 or 7 different types of shelters. And they told people, okay, if you are a senior citizen, we want you over there. If you have these disabilities, over here. If you have this medical condition, go down here. What this was doing was, 1, it was causing a lot of confusion. But 2, it was splitting apart families and community members, and that's actually the last thing we want to do. We want you all to head to the same spot because you know each other, you're each other's natural support structure. So that's my way of saying is we want everyone to go to the general population shelter. And what that also means is that's the responsibility of the state to make sure that we are making accommodations for you there. So be very vocal, speak to the volunteers about what your accommodations are. And again, as long as they're reasonable, it's our responsibility to provide them for you. So for example, if you use a wheelchair or have mobility issues, we have special cots that can be designated to a certain location, normally against a wall at a certain height, to help you with access. If you have medical equipment or like life-saving equipment, and you need to be by the generator, things like that, they will make those accommodations. If you use medication, they'll try to have you keep it on you, but if it needs to be refrigerated at certain temperatures, they make those accommodations. So the more vocal you are about your needs, the more that you'll be able to get those accommodations. So everyone heads to the general population shelter. Second big thing about shelters is pets. Who here has a pet? Okay. So during Hurricane Katrina, people were told you cannot bring your pets to the shelter, you have to leave your pets at home. And this put people in a very uncomfortable situation because for a lot of us, our pets are our family. So what ended up happening, unfortunately, was people refused to evacuate. They stayed with their dogs or their cats, and they ended up dying because they did not leave. So learning that lesson to remove that emotional burden, you can bring your pets to shelters. Try to bring a crate, bring identification, tags, certifications, medicine, food, all that good stuff. But that is not a barrier for you to go to the shelter. It is very possible that you will not be allowed to shelter with your animal. They might end up opening what's literally called a pet shelter, and they will just have all the dogs and the cats, iguanas, what have you, over there. So I can't promise you'll be able to stay with the animal, but that is not a barrier of access. Who here has a horse or a cow? Okay. So sometimes I speak in rural communities in Massachusetts, and everyone raises their hand, and everyone has a cow for some reason. So what you would do is you would not bring your cow to the shelter, but what you would do is part of your local plan, your local emergency manager will have a large livestock shelter, and they'll either tell you where to bring the animals, or they'll show you how to shelter the animal in place where it is, and then you go to the shelter. So we do make those types of plans. The next big thing is service animals. So you can bring your service animals. Service animals are viewed as an extension of the person, almost like another appendage. And that's my way of saying you'll be able to have the service animal stay with you. There's a lot of confusion around service animals, so MOD likes me to briefly talk about it. So there is no special vest that a service animal has to have on. There is no special course or certification that proves that something is or is not a service animal. If someone comes to me with their service animal, and I'm a volunteer, I can only legally ask them 2 questions. 1 is this a service animal? 2, what service does this animal provide for you? I can't say prove it. I can't say make it do a trick. So a lot of it does kind of go off of good faith, which is why I again say you can bring your pets to the shelter. You don't need to lie to the volunteers. But again, service animals are welcome. Just for fun, because I'll be flying later tonight, I am in a poor choice of timing heading down to Puerto Rico. Hopefully they'll have the lights on by the time I get there, but it's a non-refundable flight. I know what I'm doing with disaster relief anyway, so I'll be okay. But anyway, there are 2 big parts of your life that don't have to follow the ADA as it's written. One of it's housing. They have what's called the Fair Housing Acts because some buildings were built 2 centuries ago that we still occupy, so they get different waivers and variances. But the second is airlines. And that's why they can keep making seats smaller and smaller and smaller, and nobody seems to stop them. They get to live in their own world of regulation. If you were flying on a plane, you only allowed 2 different types of service animals. One is a dog. Does anyone know what the other type of service animal is?
A bird.
Smaller than a pony, a miniature horse. So they still use miniature horses as a service animal. They're used for mobility. They are allowed on planes. So if I see a horse on the plane when I'm flying tonight, I'll get to raise my hand and kind of communicate to everyone what's going on. Just a
And the horse can be in the next to
Yep, and the horse stays with the person. If you're ever watching local news at night and there's like nothing else going on, they'll just air that footage because it is funny to see. What I just shared with you cannot help you in a life-saving situation. I just like to share that as a little bit of trivia for you all. The two big takeaways from shelters were, again, everyone goes to the general population shelter unless you have a very severe medical need. Like if you're at a hospital, hospitals have their own internal systems for this, but everyone goes to the general population and you could bring your pets. So we talked about communication, we talked about sheltering. Now we're going to talk about your individual preparedness. And with that, you can now flip to the next white packet, which looks just like this. And also, I normally say this towards the end, there is no one bag per person limit. That's not how it works. So if you go to a shelter, you can have this red bag as long with other bags with your own personal effects, clothing, what have you. So that is just another important thing to remember. So now what this packet is, I refer to it as the mother packet. It would take you maybe 20 minutes to fill out, but the 20 minutes that you put into this could save your life 2 or 3 years from now in case you ever find yourself in a life-threatening situation. Did people here hear about the Merrimack Valley gas leaks, which I believe were about 2 years ago at this point? So just very quickly, Columbia Gas was overpressurizing the lines. The gas started to seep into people's houses. Houses started to explode. People were told to evacuate. And there were some people who were not allowed back into their homes for 3 to 4 months. So everyone here probably has a desk drawer or a folder somewhere that keeps all of your important documents. You have like your bank account information, your insurance information, your state-issued IDs, all of that stuff. But if you were at work or you were away, and then you were told, oh, you have to evacuate, and then you were also told you're not allowed to go back to your house for 4 months, you need to have all of this information written down somewhere so that you can keep living your life and that you're not blocked from that experience. And that's really what this is for. Because as I mentioned before, there's hypothetically 500 different scenarios, but you will always need 2 things. One is materials, which I get to right at the end, and the second is information. Because you can have the sharpest memory in the world, but if you get that little alert to evacuate, there's no one who's going to be able to then recall the phone number of their second emergency contact. That's just not how our minds work. You'll get hit with adrenaline, you'll go into fight or flight, and so it all needs to be written down. I don't need to discuss it line through line, but very quickly, the first page is your biographical information, name, address, that good stuff. Pages 2, 3, and 4 are your emergency contacts. We tell everyone to think of 3 emergency contacts, 2 that live in your area, that live in your local community, and then think of 1 person that lives in another state. And the reason for that is if there is, we'll say, some type of large natural disaster that impacts here, we all get the alert at the same time. We're all going to be kind of panicking, packing, worried about ourselves. So it'll be very hard for me to help you, for you to help me. But if you know somebody who lives away from this area, you can call that person up and say, hey, turn on the news, something crazy is going on right now, I'm going to pack. Can you try to figure out what shelter I'm supposed to go to? And now you have somebody who's nice and safe, and then they can give you that information. So 3 emergency contacts, 2 local, 1 away. The next page is your medication. So right now, I'm very calm. I can't spell or pronounce any of the medicine I take. I don't know the milligrams or any of that stuff. And that's my way of saying you need to have it all written down. If that seems very taxing, the next time you go to your doctor, pharmacist, CVS, what have you, you can just say, print out my prescription list. They'll print it for you. You can keep it right there. That way you'll have it all nice and outlined. Also, a lot of us go to Walgreens and CVS, and their new bottles have the little stickies. So the next time you finish your medication, you can just take the sticky, rip off it, put the label on that little section. That way you'll have it all written down. The next page is about your allergies, and the following is your medical conditions. So a lot of us use slang for our medical conditions. You need to have the full 27 consonants Latin phrases written out, meaning you have to have it as detailed as written medically, because if you ever, let's say, have to evacuate to a shelter, and you're speaking to a 19-year-old volunteer who doesn't know all like the lingo or jargon, you need to be able to communicate it in a way that they can find it. So make sure you have all of your medical conditions written down. Also, along with that, if you use life-saving equipment, having all like the vendor models, all of that stuff, in case it does get damaged, replaced, you're trying to find a replica, having all of that written down ahead of time will help save you. Also, at the following ending pages are about like your own evacuation route, your own emergency plan. As we've kind of discussed, it's difficult for me to tell you what your evacuation route will be. So you should have a good idea of how to get out of your house as quickly as possible. But also, if you just want to write down at the end 211 in those big numbers, that way you'll remember that is the phone number to call in case of emergencies. Now, I trust that after this training, you're all going to go home, you're all going to fill this out. But in all reality, you will fill this out, and then you will throw this on a kitchen table or put it in a desk somewhere, and you will completely forget about it. So we tell everyone to fill this out in 3 different locations. This is the first one, the mother packet that has all the information. And the second, and I feel like many of you will be familiar with this, but just in case, has people here heard about the file of life? Okay. Very quickly, it costs nothing for you. It maybe costs 3 pennies to make. It saves 10,000 lives a year. All it is a miniature version of what I just discussed. Most important things is your allergies and your medication. It's written down right there. It has a little magnet in the back. It's right on your refrigerator. And let's say you're at your house, something falls, hits you on the head, you're unconscious, somebody finds you, they call 911, police and EMS arrive. Well, there's no way that they're going to be able to find that white packet because, again, you have hidden it and you're the only ones on the planet that knows where it is. But all first responders are trained to look on your refrigerator for this. They then take it, and now they know, oh, like they have these allergies. So now EMS will know what like medication or drugs they can or cannot give you. If you do have one of these, when was the last time you checked it to make sure the medicine was updated? You might need to do that. If you need any of these, unfortunately, they only give me the one to show you, but I'm pretty confident if you spoke to the Council of Aging here, they'd be able to have somebody in the back, and if they don't, they'd be able to contact the local fire department or police department, and if they don't, they can then contact the state to get it for you.
Evan, we get them up too, so.
Okay, perfect. So everyone here should have one, and if you don't, you should be able to leave with one. So this is the second place. I want you to put all your information. The third and final place is the shiny blue packet. So I always get a kick when I do these trainings because the first thing people do when I hand this to you is you start to spin it to try to figure out how it's written. The reason it's printed like this is my supervisor figured out that if I print it like this and I just show you how to fold it, it saves us like $10,000. None of you need to do this, but just for my own little origami to show you, if you have it so the bag is facing you, and then you take it from the top, pinch it back like that. So now this is what is visible to you. Then take it in the middle, fold it down. Now it kind of looks like it makes sense. This is also the part of the training where 2 of you will stop listening and you'll just keep trying to fold it. I will sit here and do all of this for you if you need me to. It can't save you in a situation, but and all this is a condensed version of what I've discussed thus far. How to contact the Massachusetts Office on Disability. The back pages are about shelter in place. What materials do you need? But I'm about to discuss that in about 3 minutes. On the middle, this is where you write for the third and final time all of your personal information. Fill it out. Fold it any way you want. Put it in a Ziploc bag so it's waterproof. And then just put it right in the red bag. That way, in case you do get that alert, you forget to grab the big packet, you forget your file of life. If all you do is remember the red bag, you'll have it there, so you'll have your information. The last thing that I want to highlight, because it looks a little out of place, it says active shooter / terrorism. So the reason that's there, I briefly mentioned this at the beginning, is while I directly work for the Massachusetts Office on Disability, my paycheck is from a grant from the federal government, from the Department of Homeland Security. And if you ever work for a state or government agency, If you take their money, they can say, okay, but you have to talk about this. So they want me to discuss active shooter / terrorism. What this is, an active shooter is whenever you maybe hear gunfire and you think there's someone going around killing people indiscriminately. It happens all too often, so I'm sure you've all heard about it on the news. It does follow the steps of a natural disaster. So to put it basically, the first step they tell you to do is to run. I tell people it's possible you might have to skip that step, either because A, mobility issues, running is not an option, or 2, if you ever have heard gunfire in real life, it doesn't sound the same way it does on television. It's very difficult to know if what you just heard was gunfire. Also, gunfire echoes. It bounces off every wall, brick building, and frame. So it's also very difficult to know the direction that it's coming from. So that's my way of saying, unless you're 100% sure that going that way is safe, you would then do the second step, which is to shelter in place. If you're in an outdoor environment, you get as low as you can, try to get behind something. If you're in an indoor environment, you shut and lock the doors, you shut off the lights. If you can, barricade the door, meaning put things in front of it. Stay out of view of the windows, turn your phone to silent, stay nice and quiet. The third step, that is when you fight. The reason that's a step is if you can imagine I'm speaking in front of like a college audience. Some kids might think, oh, if I hear gunfire, I want to run towards it to stop that person. I, as a representative of the state, do not want you to do that because you'd be putting yourself in harm's way. So you only fight as a last resort. And then fourth and finally is to listen to the first responders, keep your hands visible, move nice and slow, do what they tell you to do. It's not the most pleasant topic. I'm happy to answer any questions you have on it. But now to cheer you up, I can show you the free stuff that I get to give you all. So in disaster world, there's something called the rule of 4. Every 4 minutes you have to breathe. Every 4 hours you need shelter, whether that's clothing or protection from the environment. Every 4 days you need water, and every 4 weeks you need food. It's not 100% accurate, depending on your age, body type, and environment. You could make it 6 days without water. The purpose of these bags is not to imagine you're on a desert island by yourself and you're like fighting to survive for months. That's not really their function. Their function is 2 different things. One, I've lived in Massachusetts for most of my life. I'm sure many of you have had very bad snowstorms. I remember in 2015 in Boston, we had these back-to-back-to-back snowstorms where you just couldn't physically go outside. It wasn't possible. So are you self-sufficient for 2 or 3 days inside of your own home? Or again, like with the California wildfires, if power goes out, if there's a little bit of chaos going on, can you self-sustain for 2 or 3 days? 3 days is the standard that we try to make it so everyone can fit. Or the second example, sadly, again, the California wildfires, not the most recent ones, but the ones before that. Somebody got the alert to evacuate, and they sent out a little tweet, or like a little message on the internet, and they said, I just got the alert to evacuate. I panicked. All I did was grab my Tom Brady jersey and ran, which is very funny. Tom Brady liked it. That's how I know about it. But then about 20 hours later, that same person messaged out, oh, I've been stuck in traffic for 20 hours without food or water. I really wish I had something to eat. So that's my way of saying if there ever is a large-scale evacuation, it is possible that you will be in a bus, a shuttle, in a vehicle for 24 hours. Everyone in this room could make it 24 hours without food or water, but we don't want to go through that. We want everyone to stay nourished and alert so that you can get from where you are to where you need to go. The biggest thing that we do not give you that you need to go buy is food. The reason for that is we used to buy like 6 cans and throw them in here. But then after the training, when people would take the bag, it was so physically heavy that they couldn't lift it. So I would say go buy cans, dry goods, keep them in your residence. You'll have them for a shelter in place. Buy cans, dry goods, whatever you want. Put them in the red bag. That way you'll have them in case you have to evacuate. But we do give you plenty of water. So each bag contains 2 large packets of emergency water. This is not normal water, and what I mean by that is it's condensed, purified with a lot of electrolytes. 2 of these individual bags are good per day per person, which means we give you enough water for 2 or 3 people for 2 or 3 days. Also, these have a very long shelf life. The bottles of water that we all drink, they last roughly 9 months to a year, and then they could collect bacteria or be unsafe to drink. These bags are good for 5 years, which means you'll all be good until 2025, at which point just throw them away, buy gallons of water, and just recycle them. Also, we give you 2 emergency blankets. If you've ever watched like a marathon, when they cross the finish line, it looks like they're wrapping them in tin foil. It's not actual tin foil, it's this material. And what this does is it keeps in your body heat to help your body kind of just sustain. I got asked this once at a training, so now I always talk about it. If I had my nice coffee thermos, not this, but my nice one, if you put cold water in it, it stays cold. If you put warm water in it, it stays warm. That is not how this works. This doesn't work like a thermos. That's my way of saying this can only be used to maintain or increase your body heat. So if it's the middle of summer, do not wrap yourself in this because it will overheat, and people have gone through emergencies where they wrap themselves in this during like a hot environment and end up developing heat stroke or heat exhaustion because of it. So this is only to be used in like a cold weather situation. We also give you 2 ponchos. Everyone's familiar with the poncho. It keeps the water off you to stay dry. If there's some fun event happening in this area that you want to go to and you think to yourself, oh, I should bring a poncho, you're all going to remember that you now have free ponchos in this bag. I promise you that there's no one in this room, myself included, that could take this out of this bag and then refold it and put it back in the bag. It's just not possible. So that's my way of saying these are all single use. You can take it, have fun, live your life, but then you have to remember to buy another one and put it back in the bag in case you actually need it for an emergency. We also give you hand warmers. They say 10 hours. If you've ever used hand warmers before, you know they're good for about 3. It looks like a little bean bag. You just take it out, squeeze it, punch it a couple of times, it activates it. But between the hand warmers, the emergency blanket, and the poncho, you'll keep your body temperature up to get from where you are to where you need to go. We also give you plenty of packets of tissues. One, people will be crying, these are heavily traumatic events, but also if you're stuck in traffic for 36 hours, if you have to pull over and use the bathroom, you're taken care of. There's always one person that laughs at that. We also give you a first aid kit. If you ever stay in a shelter, even if you get like a very minor paper cut, make sure you treat it, use the alcohol swabs and put a Band-Aid on it. Diseases spread rapidly in shelters because you'll be around a lot of people in a condensed environment, not keeping up with their hygiene as regularly. So make sure you treat any minor wounds. We also give you 2 feminine hygiene pads. So they have their initial use, but also if you look at the Band-Aids in here, they're very small. This is actually the best bandage that you have in this bag. So if you're ever with somebody that gets a very big cut, the number 1 rule is pressure. You would just take these like this, take them out of the bag, put it on the wound and press down. So this is the largest bandage in the bag. If there is ever a shelter in place, one of the most common injuries will be people will slice their hands when they try to open the cans that they bought like 3 or 4 years ago. So we got you all a can opener. It has a little hand guard right there, so you can just put your hand there and then you'll be okay. We also got you a hygiene kit because if there ever is an evacuation, chances are you might forget to go to your bathroom, your shower to grab your shampoo and toothbrush and that good stuff. So we have everything for you. We have a razor, we have a comb, if you're lucky enough to still have your hair. We also have a little red bio bag. What this is used for is to separate your waste. So if you're in a car for 24 hours, people are sneezing, what have you, put it all in the red bag so that way you can stay safe from disease. We also give you a red Fanny Pack, which for a while, I didn't know why we did this. So people would ask me if they could just take this to the casino, and I would say sure. But it actually does have a mental health benefit. If you're ever in a shelter, you'll be around a lot of people you don't know. So you might be very nervous about getting up from your cot to leave your stuff. But you can take your money, your IDs, your personal information, put them in here, put it on your hip, go for a walk to stretch your legs. Yep. We also have some communication equipment. So if you're in a vehicle late at night, or if you need to get somebody's attention, we have a whistle. We give you a little glow stick, so you can take this out of the bag. It's a little plastic tube. kind of bend it, the two chemicals mix together, it lights up to about 12 hours. You'll be able to flag somebody down, again, if a vehicle breaks down late at night. The best item we give you is the 4-in-1 flashlight radio. So we used to give the flashlight radios that had those big Duracell batteries, but what ended up happening was 5 years from now, in case there was an emergency, the batteries were dead. So learning that lesson, this doesn't use batteries. It uses a very small hand crank. 1 minute of doing this gives you 10 minutes of power. It has a flashlight, it has a little noise maker, it has a radio so you can get information in the moment. But the coolest thing this can do is it can charge your cell phones. So it has a little USB port. You can put your cell phone charger. It's a universal device at this point. That cell phone chargers use a little USB thing. You plug it in here, you crank to get a charge. So if you have a smartphone, like one of these, you have a little bit of an advantage because it can go on the internet. You can download that cool app I talked about. But it does require a lot of power. They're basically mini computers. That's why the batteries keep dying. So I've been able to do it. I've killed my battery, plugged it in here, cranked it to get a charge. That's my way of saying just hand this to the healthiest person you're with and tell them to go nuts. But who here kept the old school flip phones, or the ones that can't go on the internet? Okay. So sometimes people are embarrassed to say it, but those are incredibly easy to charge. And everyone in this room has enough upper body strength to just take the phone, do this a few times to get a charge so that you can call 911. So along with everything here, yes, do you have a question?
Is there a connection for your phone in there in case you forgot your connection?
Unfortunately, no. So this requires you to have your cell phone charger with you, but this can charge it for you. So you still need to have your cell phone charger.
I'll keep it in the bag.
Or you can buy an extra and just keep it right in the bag. And so along with everything here, this is a good starting point. But again, you need to add two things to it. One is food. That way you'll be self-sufficient. The second is your information. Make copies of your state issue ID, birth certificate, social security card, bank account information, health insurance information. Again, imagining you go through what happened in Lawrence and Andover, and you're just not physically allowed back into your house for 4 months. That way you can just keep living your life. Before I leave you all today, I have two asks of you. The first is to actually fill out your information. It is very easy to go through this training and to think, well, this will never happen to me, take the free stuff, not the worst way to spend an afternoon. But there are two things I can promise you. Well, first, it would be the ideal situation is if you never use any of this. That you take this, you put this in a closet, 15 years from now you find it and you think, oh, that was funny, and you just throw it away. That would be the best case scenario. However, there are two things that I can tell you. One is that we have the oldest infrastructure in the United States. There was, I believe, reported 32,000 gas leaks in Massachusetts in 2018. And having the oldest infrastructure means that events like the Merrimack Valley gas leak could happen, hypothetically, with more and more probability. The second thing I can promise you is there is more moisture in the air. When there's more moisture in the air, two different things happen. One, you have more storms. Second, the storms you do have are higher in intensity and harder to predict. So again, I hope you never have to go through a natural disaster or man-made event, but make sure you fill out your information. The second ask I have for you is actually for me. So I have a really cool job where all I do is travel around. I put on trainings like this. I try to steal coffee from whatever the local area is, and then I leave and go home. That's my way of saying that right now my boss actually has no idea if I'm here right now. I could hypothetically be on my couch watching television, and I could just send him an email saying, oh yeah, the training went great. I could then, if I wanted to, sell these bags for about $20 a piece. And I am pretty clever, and despite right now being on television, no one would catch me. I don't want to do that, so instead what we do is a little mini evaluation. I'm going to pass these out in just a moment. You do not need to put anything at the top. I actually get a kick out of reading the comments at the bottom, so if you'd like to leave me a comment, please do. But all I need you to do is just check the boxes. Agree means you thought I did a great job. Partly agree means you thought I was meh. Disagree means you thought I was horrible. I'm going to give you all the bag regardless, so you can be truthful. I'm also going to pass out some pens. Every training I do, people steal the pens. try not to steal the pens, but if you do, that's okay. I'll just bill the state and get some more. Besides that, if you have any questions, I'll answer them as I'm passing these out, but you've all been a fantastic audience. Thank you very much.
Add a couple more things. We have waterproof document bags, and there's a list as well as in the literature that Evan handed out of the suggested documents that you keep in this bag, copies that you keep in this bag. So you can add this to your backpack, as well as these are cases for the back of your phone. I have one on my phone. You can hold your ID, credit card, health card. Makes it easy so you don't have to bring your whole wallet. You can have everything right attached to your phone. So we have these up here as well, and additional bags for the overflow. Anything that won't fit into the backpack, you can put your pet supplies, whatever you need in here. Keep it with the backpack. And there's actually some suggested items on the printed on the bag here too. So these will all be available up here that you can grab separately. But so they're gonna start handing everything out. Thank you for having us.
Thank you.